All right. So you sent over some really interesting research here about human factors in aviation. It's
What?
about how our senses can basically play tricks on us while we're in the air.
Yeah.
I gotta admit, when I first saw all the stuff you sent over, I was like, wait, am I gonna need a pilot's license just to follow along here? With all these like diagrams of the inner ear and all these crazy
Well,
terms.
thankfully, no flight suit is required for today's deep dive.
Okay, good.
But what's really cool is this information is relevant to everyone,
Okay.
even if you're more of a feet firmly planted on the ground kind of person like me.
That's what I love about these deep dives. There's always something unexpected.
Yeah.
So, what are some of the big takeaways from the research? What should we be focusing on?
So the big aha moment for me was just how easily our brains can misinterpret information from our senses when we're in the air,
Mm-hmm.
which can lead to some really dangerous situations.
Okay.
So we're going to be exploring how things like vision balance and even our sense of posture can become unreliable when we're flying, even for experienced pilots.
Okay, now that's both fascinating and slightly unsettling.
Right.
Like, if we can't trust our own senses, what can we trust?
That is the question.
Yeah,
And it's something that pilots actually grapple with all the time.
really?
Yeah, so over 80% of aviation accidents are actually linked to what are called human factors.
Wow.
And oftentimes it's not about pilots making bad decisions, but rather their brains getting tricked by what their senses are telling them.
Okay.
So it's like a sensory illusion, but with much higher stakes.
80%, that's a huge number.
Yeah, it's a lot.
So it's not just pilots forgetting to check the fuel gauge or something. It's way more complicated than that.
Oh yeah, it's a lot more nuanced than that.
Okay.
It's really about how our brains process sensory information and how that processing can kind of go awry under the unique conditions of flight.
Uh-huh.
So think about it this way. We got three main systems that work together to help us orient ourselves.
Okay.
We have vision, the vestibular system, which is our inner ear, and our postural system, which gives us that sense of where our body is in space.
So, like, on the ground, all three of those systems are working in sync, giving us a pretty accurate picture of the world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But when you're flying, things get a lot more complicated.
Okay.
These systems can start sending conflicting signals to your brain,
Mm.
and all of a sudden, up might not feel like up, or a straight line might look curved.
Oh, wow. I'm starting to see how that can get dangerous pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So let's break down each of these systems then and really try to understand how they can fool us.
Okay.
Let's start with vision. I'm assuming that one's pretty crucial for, flying a plane.
Absolutely. Vision is the primary sense that pilots rely on.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. It's not always as reliable as we think,
Okay.
especially in the air.
Uh-huh.
For instance, did you know we actually have two blind spots in each eye?
Wait, two?
Yeah.
I thought it was just the one where the optic nerve connects in the back of the eye.
You're right about the daytime blind spot. That one's always there.
Oh.
But at night, a different blind spot emerges right in the center of our vision.
What?
Yeah. And this is because the cells that are responsible for our night vision, those are called rods.
Okay.
They're actually concentrated around the edges of our retinas, not the center.
So if you're looking directly at something at night, it could just vanish.
Pretty much. Yeah, it's wild.
That's crazy.
And this is why pilots are trained to scan their surroundings at night and really use their peripheral vision to avoid that central blind spot.
Okay.
So it sounds counterintuitive, but it can literally be the difference between spotting another aircraft or missing it completely.
Wow, that's mind-blowing.
Yeah.
Once you realize how much we just take our vision for granted.
For sure.
And it sounds like there are other ways that our brains can mess with what we see too, right? Like the research mentioned something about color perception and a Rubik's Cube.
Right. That's such a good example.
Yeah.
Because it shows how our brains interpret color based on context. So a square that appears orange on the shaded side of a Rubik's Cube is actually brown when you isolate it.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Our brains adjust the colors we see based on the surrounding light. And this can have some pretty interesting implications for pilots.
So like trying to land a plane at dusk or in hazy conditions, things could look a lot different than they actually are.
Yeah, you said it.
Oh, wow. Okay. And it's not just color, right? Our perception of size and distance can get messed up too.
Yeah, totally.
Like the research you sent over mentioned Shepherd's tables,
Yeah.
which is that classic optical illusion where two tables are the same size, but one looks way longer because of the way the lines are drawn.
Yeah, it's trippy.
I've seen that one before. It just completely messes with your brain.
Totally.
But how does that apply to flying?
Well, imagine you're landing on a runway that's wider than you're used to,
Okay.
and the terrain around the airport is uneven.
Uh-huh.
Because of those visual cues, that runway might appear closer than it actually is.
Oh, I see.
And this can lead a pilot to misjudge their approach.
So even in perfect visibility, our eyes can deceive us.
It's true.
Okay, this is making flying seem like a constant battle against your own senses.
In a way, it is.
Uh,
But what about when it gets dark? How does night vision even work, and what are some of the challenges there?
yeah, so that's where things get even more interesting.
Okay.
It actually takes around 30 minutes for our eyes to fully adapt to darkness, which is a process called dark adaptation.
Okay.
And to help with this, cockpits use red light.
Oh, yeah, the classic red glow in the cockpit.
Right.
I was wondering why they do that.
Yeah, so red light doesn't interfere with those rods in our eyes as much as other colors, so it helps to preserve our night vision.
That makes sense.
But there's a trade-off.
Oh,
Red light can make it harder to read charts and really focus on objects that are inside the cockpit.
so better night vision outside, but potential challenges inside.
Exactly. It's always a balancing act.
Always a balancing act.
Okay.
Speaking of balance, let's move on to that second system that helps us orient ourselves, the vestibular system.
Which is located in our inner ear.
You got it.
So we're talking about our sense of balance now, but what's so special about the inner ear? Besides, hearing, of course.
Well, the inner ear is actually responsible for sensing both angular acceleration, like turning, and linear acceleration, like speeding up or slowing down.
Okay.
And it also plays a huge role in our sense of gravity.
Right.
And all this is thanks to these two key components, the semicircular canals and the otolith organs.
Oh, yeah. I remember seeing those in the diagrams, but they looked a little, well, complicated.
Yeah, they are definitely intricate structures.
Yeah.
But we can break them down.
Okay.
So imagine the semicircular canals as 3 fluid-filled tubes,
Okay.
and they're arranged at right angles to each other.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
So when you turn your head, the fluid in these canals sloshes around,
Uh-huh.
and this stimulates tiny hairs that send signals to your brain.
So it's the movement of that fluid that tells us that we're turning.
Exactly.
Wow.
But here's where it gets really fascinating. If you maintain a constant turn for a while, that fluid eventually settles,
Okay.
and the sensation of turning disappears.
Wait, so even though you're still turning, it feels like you're flying straight.
Yeah, it's super disorienting.
Hold on, that sounds really dangerous.
It can be,
Mm.
especially when you try to level off,
Okay.
because that fluid in the canals suddenly moves in the opposite direction.
Uh-huh.
You get this false sensation of turning the other way,
Oh, no.
and this can lead to you overcorrecting and potentially even losing control of the plane.
Okay, I think I get that. But what about those other things in the inner ear, the otolith organs? What do they do?
So the otolith organs are like these tiny little gravity detectors.
Okay.
They have these tiny crystals embedded in a gel-like membrane.
Mm-hmm.
And when you tilt your head or experience linear acceleration, these crystals shift,
Okay.
and they stimulate hairs that send signals to your brain about which way is up.
So they're like our built-in level.
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay, but like the semicircular canals, I'm guessing they can be tricked too.
Oh, yeah, for sure they can be tricked, leading to some pretty wild illusions.
Okay, well let's dive into those then and
Okay,
see what kind of trouble they can cause us up in the air.
sounds good.
Okay, so before we went off track there, we were talking about how our inner ear can create these really convincing illusions, especially when it comes to turning in flight.
It's true.
It's crazy to think our own bodies are like working against us up there.
And it's amazing how these illusions can catch even the most experienced pilots off guard.
Yeah.
You know, there's this one illusion called the leans that really highlights this.
Okay, the leans.
So imagine you're a pilot and you're banking your plane very slowly to the left.
Okay, so a nice gentle left turn.
Right now, because that movement is so gradual, the fluid in those semicircular canals we talked about might not move enough to register a strong sensation of turning.
So you might not even realize you're turning the plane.
Yeah, it can be really subtle.
That's a little scary.
It is. And then when you correct that bank, even gently, that sudden shift in fluid can create the illusion that you're now banking to the right.
Oh, wow.
So it feels like you're tilted the wrong way.
So what do? Do you like instinctively lean back into that original left bank even though the plane is level?
Exactly. It's like your body is trying to fight against the plane.
Wow.
And that can lead to all sorts of problems, especially if you're not relying on your instruments to tell you what the plane is actually doing.
Okay, this is making me feel a little dizzy just thinking about it.
Yeah, it's a lot to wrap your head around.
So with the leans, it's like your body is slow to catch up with what the plane is doing.
Right.
Are there any illusions where it's more about like sudden movement?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
There's one that every pilot learns about called the Coriolis illusion.
The Coriolis illusion.
You might have heard of the Coriolis effect.
Oh, yeah, that has to do with the Earth's rotation, right?
Exactly.
Like how things deflect to the right in the northern hemisphere and to the left in the southern hemisphere because the Earth is spinning.
You got it.
Yeah.
But the Coriolis illusion in aviation is a little bit different.
Okay.
It happens when you've been in a turn for a while and that fluid in your inner ear has settled.
Okay.
So you're no longer really feeling that sensation of turning.
Uh-huh.
And then if you move your head quickly in a different direction,
Oh, no, I can see where this is going.
like to look for something in the cockpit or reach for a chart,
You get that sudden sensation of movement again, but in a totally different direction.
you nailed it. It's like your brain is getting all these mixed signals.
Wow.
You might think the plane is pitching or rolling when it's actually flying perfectly straight.
And that could lead to some pretty bad decisions, right?
Yeah, if you react instinctively, it could be really dangerous.
It's amazing how even just like turning your head can create such a powerful illusion.
It really is.
But I guess that's why pilots train so much to trust their instruments over anything else, right?
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
They have to learn to ignore those false sensations and rely on what the instruments are telling them.
Right.
Speaking of which, there's this one particularly notorious inner ear illusion that every pilot knows about.
Okay.
And it has a pretty chilling name. The graveyard spiral.
Graveyard spiral? Oh, that doesn't sound good.
Remember how we were talking about that fluid in the semicircular canals settling during a prolonged turn?
Mm-hmm.
Well, imagine you're flying in a constant turn, maybe in the clouds where you don't have any visual references.
Okay.
You might not even realize you're still turning because you feel like you're flying straight and level.
Right, but you're not. So what happens?
Well, as the plane continues to turn, it naturally starts to lose altitude.
Okay.
But since you don't feel like you're turning, you might misinterpret that loss of altitude as a straight descent.
I see.
So what do you pull back on the controls trying to level off?
Oh, no. And because you're actually still in a turn, pulling back just makes the turn tighter?
Exactly. You descend faster and faster,
Yeah.
still thinking you're flying level.
That's terrifying.
It's a terrifying scenario, and unfortunately, it has led to many accidents.
Wow. That's a sobering thought.
It is.
It really shows you how important it is for pilots to be aware of these illusions and know how to overcome them.
It's crucial.
Are there any other inner ear illusions we should be aware of?
There are a few more,
Okay.
but they're not as well known as the graveyard spiral.
Okay.
There's the somatographic illusion, which is triggered by rapid acceleration.
Yeah.
So imagine taking off on a foggy night.
Okay. And we haven't even talked about optical illusions yet.
Right. Those can be just as tricky, maybe even more so because we tend to rely so heavily on our vision.
Yeah, that's true.
But I think we should save those for our next segment.
Okay, sounds good. Let's take a quick break and then we'll come back and dive into the world of optical illusions.
Sounds good to me.
Okay, so we're back and my head's still spinning a little bit from all those inner ear illusions.
Yeah, those are pretty wild.
It's incredible how easily our brains can just like misinterpret what our body is telling us, especially when we're up in the air.
For sure.
But we still have those optical illusions to talk about.
Yeah.
The ones that specifically mess with our vision.
Yeah, optical illusions are fascinating
Yeah.
because, as humans, we tend to really trust what we see,
Right.
maybe even more than our other senses.
Mm-hmm.
But in aviation and in life, really what we see isn't always the whole picture.
Okay.
Sometimes it can be downright misleading.
So what kind of optical illusions can pilots actually encounter up there?
Well, one of the most common and potentially dangerous ones is the false horizon.
The false horizon. Okay.
Yeah, it happens when the actual horizon is obscured,
Okay.
maybe by clouds or darkness, or even like a bright city skyline.
Right.
So our brains try to make sense of the visual information they're getting.
Uh-huh.
And they might latch onto a sloping cloud layer or a line of lights and mistake it for the real horizon.
Oh, so the pilot could end up banking or pitching the plane thinking they're maintaining level flight,
Right.
but actually they're totally off.
Exactly. It's like
Yeah.
your brain is filling in the missing information
Yeah.
with whatever visual cues it can find, even if those cues are wrong.
Okay, I'm really starting to understand why pilots need to be trained to trust their instruments over their senses.
Yeah, it's so important.
It seems like our instincts can really lead us astray up there.
They can.
Are there any other optical illusions that kind of highlight this point?
Yeah, there's one that I find particularly interesting
Okay.
called autokinesis.
Autokinesis. I don't think I've heard of that one.
So it's this weird illusion where If you stare at a stationary light for a long time in the dark, it'll start to look like it's moving.
What?
Yeah, you can actually experience this yourself.
Really?
Next time you're out on a clear night, try fixing your gaze on a single star.
Mm-hmm.
After a while, it might look like it's drifting or even circling.
Whoa. Okay, that's a little creepy.
It is kind of freaky, right?
So is it like our vision's getting blurry or something?
It's not about blurry vision.
Okay.
Scientists think it actually has to do with these tiny involuntary movements that our eyes make.
Uh-huh.
Our brains try to compensate for those movements.
Okay.
But in doing so, they create this illusion that the light itself is moving.
So if a pilot is fixated on a single light source at night, like another aircraft's lights or a beacon,
Correctly.
they could end up chasing a moving target that's not actually moving.
Exactly. They could veer off course or
Right.
even, fly into a dangerous situation, all because their brain is misinterpreting that visual information.
So it's really all about cross-checking your instruments and not just relying on what you see, especially at night.
Yeah, that's a good rule of thumb.
Okay, so we've talked about vision, we've talked about our sense of balance,
Right.
but the research also mentions something called the postural system.
Yes.
So what is that exactly? Is that like our sense of proprioception, knowing where our body is in space?
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it.
Okay.
It's that seat of the pants. Sense the feedback we get from our muscles and joints, telling us about our body's position and movement.
But I'm guessing this system can be fooled too, especially during flight.
You guessed it.
So even if the plane is flying straight and level, you might feel like you're tilted or turning.
Precisely imagine you're in a skidding or slipping turn.
Okay.
The plane is not properly coordinated,
Mm-hmm.
but you might feel like you're tilted sideways in your seat, even though the wings are level.
So it's like our bodies are trying to make flying as hard as possible.
Right, our own body's working against us.
So knowing all this, what can pilots do to avoid falling for all these illusions and stay safe up there?
Well, as we've talked about, a big part of it is awareness.
Okay.
Understanding how these illusions work is the first step towards recognizing and counteracting them. There's also a lot of training involved,
Right.
practicing in simulators,
Yeah.
learning to trust instruments over your gut feeling,
Right.
and really just developing a healthy skepticism of your own senses.
So trust but verify, or in this case, I guess it would be trust your instruments but verify with your senses.
Exactly.
But is there anything that non-pilots like myself can take away from all of this?
Absolutely. One of the big takeaways for me is this. Our perceptions aren't always accurate.
Okay.
So whether you're driving in fog or making a big decision, or even just trying to understand a complex situation, just being aware of the potential for bias and illusion
Right.
can make you a much more critical thinker.
So it's not just about flying planes, it's about navigating life with a more discerning eye.
I like to...
Like knowing that what we see and feel isn't always the whole truth.
Exactly.
Wow, that's a pretty powerful message to end on.
Yeah.
I'm really glad we took this deep dive together. It's been eye-opening, to say the least.
You too.
Any final thoughts for our listeners before we wrap up?
If there's one thing I want you to take away from all of this, it's this. Don't be afraid to question your own perceptions.
Okay.
The world is full of illusions, both literal and figurative.
Right.
By being aware of them, we can all become more discerning, more critical thinkers, and ultimately better navigators of our own lives.
I love that it's like a reminder that there's always more to learn, more to explore, and more to discover about ourselves and the world around us.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. And until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep exploring.
I'll see you next time.